Good afternoon. My name is David Graydon. I'm the Clifford Chair of Neural Engineering in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Melbourne. I have the pleasure of being the MC for our webinar panel discussion today. Before proceeding with the event, I'd like to provide a short overview about myself. My research focuses on understanding how the brain processes information, how best to present information to the brain using medical bionics, such as the bionic ear and bionic eye, and how to record information from the brain for brain-computer interfaces. I'm also leading research in epileptic seizure prediction and electrical stimulation to prevent and stop epileptic seizures. Along with Associate Professor Quang Lim at the Melbourne Business School, I teach the Biodesign Innovation course, which trains students in the process of how to innovate in medical technology development. So I'd like to start today's event by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm hosting this webinar, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Okay, so thank you for joining us with the industry leaders and academics from across the globe on the topic of innovation in brain-computer interfaces. Next slide, please. Today's discussion is being delivered remotely, and I would like to take a moment to thank you for registering your participation in our webinar. So I'm pleased to be joined by Assistant Professor Ricky Mueller from Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences at the University of California, Berkeley in the United States. Associate Professor Nicholas Opie, or Nick Opie, who is a biomedical engineer at the University of Melbourne and is a founder of Synchron, a brain-computer interface company. Associate Professor Tara Hamilton from the School of Electrical and Data Engineering at the University of Technology, Sydney. And Dr. Christoph Guger, founder of GTech Medical Engineering based in Austria. Especially thank Christoph for joining us, as it's very early in the morning for him. Also Dr. Farhad Gudazi, who is an electrical engineer with the School of Medicine at the University of Melbourne. And Andy Partovi, who is a PhD candidate in brain-computer interface research at the University of Melbourne in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. I would also like to introduce you to Zara, our graphic recorder, who will be doing a live sketch of the event today. Zara's sketch will appear on your screen throughout this session, so you can watch the illustration come to life. So our plan is that the panel will first provide brief presentations, and then we will open for questions from the audience. Okay, so now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Farhad Gudazi and Mr. Andy Partovi. So Farhad finished his PhD in 2015 on the design of a wireless microchip for implanted medical devices. He has worked in academia and industry since. Currently, he is with the University of Melbourne's Department of Medicine at St. Vincent's Hospital, developing software to decode brain activity for the next generation of brain-computer interfaces. Andy is a PhD candidate in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Melbourne, researching deep learning algorithms for brain-computer interface decoding. Andy has co-founded the BCI Australia Meetup Group as a social and knowledge-sharing hub for BCI enthusiasts in Australia and around the globe. He'll talk a little bit about that group later on. So over to you, Farhad and Andy.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Just a quick confirmation that you can all hear me well.
Sounds good, Andy.
Awesome, thank you. I'll talk a little bit more about the Neurotech Australia community at the end of the session, but we thought that it would be best to start by providing an overview of what is a BCI system and what are some of the common components, and of course the panelists will talk more about some of these later as well. Brain-computer interface systems essentially build a communication channel between the brain and external devices, whether those devices are computers or other electronic devices like spellers and robotic arms. This is normally a two-way communication channel where the brain stimulation can be considered as writing back to the brain, but the main focus of many BCI systems today is usually on reading from the brain side. You can imagine that such direct link between the brain and external devices will allow people to give commands to those devices by just thinking about it, effectively mind controlling the devices and getting rid of all of these intermediary peripheral ways we interact with computers today. Outside the realm of science fiction, this is especially useful for people who are suffering from spinal cord injury, stroke complications, and so on, to restore mobility and communication. So while the video is playing, showing you how a BCI system can be used to control a drone or a robotic arm, I'll talk a little bit about the components involved here. So BCI is a very multidisciplinary system. At a very high level, the first step is reading the brain activity, usually in form of electronic signals. This is the hardware component, which you will hear a lot about from the panelists and Farhad himself as well. Then analyzing and processing those signals. This is the signal processing component, which has modules such as noise reduction and signal quality enhancements. And the next step is somehow interpreting those signals, which means decoding what the people were actually thinking about, usually using some form of machine learning or pattern recognition algorithms, which is the computer science component of it, and which is what I'm interested in. And finally, relaying those to external devices in form of commands, whether robotics or smart devices, needing a lot of transitional skills in all areas of engineering. And of course, at the heart of all of this is neuroscience and the knowledge of the brain.
Yeah, so reading from the brain can be accomplished in multiple methods. Invasively, that's Elon Musk's way. This usually requires a surgery of some sorts because you need to have access to brain somehow. It could be through the skull, it could be actually sitting on the surface of the cortex, or it could be actually through the blood vessels. And you will hear more on this from the panel. The bad side of this method is pretty obvious, I hope. But the good side has many advantages. First of all, when we have the best signal quality when we're close to the source of the activity. Also, brain activity is very regional, and neurons are very interconnected and densely located. So moving the sensors, even in millimeters inside the brain, will change the meaning of the signals that you're receiving. And secondly, it's much easier to stimulate the brain cells when you're in close proximity to them. So that's useful for closing the feedback loop, or in other words, writing back in a more meaningful way. There's also a non-invasive way. This is usually the preferred method. This is where a lot of groups around the world are focusing a lot of their solutions. In this method, the sensors are usually located outside of the skull, and they're reading activity from the brain from a much further distance. The most common method in this would be an EEG cap that would read the electrical activity of the brain. But that's only one method. And as you might imagine, there are other types of activity of the brain that can be recorded, such as the magnetic field. Everywhere there is an electric field, there's always a magnetic field, so you can read the magnetic activity. We can also look at the oxygen levels, like the same thing that like an MRI machine will do, or even the metabolic activities of the brain. So these are all the different methods that we can read the activity of the brain. But once we read these signals, we need to analyze them. And there are traditional ways of signal processing pathways that would require a lot of manual feature engineering and requires highly skilled individuals sitting down and going through those features and data cleaning techniques. Or alternatively, in recent years, with all these advancements of the neural networks, now a lot of people are thinking about using the neural networks and newer machine learning algorithms to create a better way of decoding brain activities. The only problem with this is that the neural networks usually require very big training data sets, and currently it's not really easy to get access to big data sets that are required for these trainings. Just to add to the complexity of all of these problems, a brain-computer interface is only useful if it can do things in real time, meaning that if you have a model that can vary with really good high accuracy, if it can change the decoding of the brain, if it's not happening in real time, then it's pretty much useless. So as David mentioned, here at the University of Melbourne Biomedical Engineering Department, we have a group of experts that are working on all aspects of this problem, from modeling the brain and the neuroscience aspect of it to all the invasive and non-invasive recording and stimulating of the brain, decoding algorithms, software development, and also robotics and device integration. So if you're interested in this field, please sign up to the Neurotech Oz Meetup group and get in touch with myself and Andy, and we'd be more than happy to guide you to the right people. So back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Farhad and Andy, for this introduction to the field of brain-computer interfaces. I think this sets up well for the rest of the session. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Assistant Professor Ricky Muller, who is a co-director of Berkeley Wireless Research Center and a member of the Center for Neural Engineering and Prostheses and an investigator at the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub. Her research group focuses on emerging implantable medical devices and in developing low-power wireless microelectronic and integrated systems for neurological applications. Professor Muller is also co-founder of Cortera Neurotechnologies, a medical device company that is commercializing a neural implant device. Thank you very much, Ricky.
Thanks for the introduction, David. Hi, everyone from San Francisco. My name is Ricky Muller. As David already introduced, I am an assistant professor of electrical engineering and computer sciences at UC Berkeley. I was the co-founder of Cortera Neurotechnologies, which was founded in 2013, but was actually acquired a year ago in 2019. But I'm going to show a little bit of the work that we did there too. So my group at UC Berkeley builds interfaces with the brain and peripheral nervous system. We design implants for medical applications to treat intractable neurological disorders. And we also design wearables for brain-computer interfacing and healthcare monitoring. In particular, my group works on microelectronic hardware-based solutions to integrate a high degree of functionality into very small devices. We give the devices wireless capabilities so that the devices are untethered. There's nothing poking through the skin. There are no routes for infection. Wires are also common points of mechanical failure in these types of devices, and wireless power can eliminate the need for batteries, helping to shrink the device into very small form factors. So let me give 3 quick examples of the types of devices we work on. This is the first one that you're seeing here. It's based on deep brain stimulation. So you can think of deep brain stimulators as like pacemakers for the brain. And they're commonly used to treat Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and other movement disorders. Today's commercial devices, they only have a few electrodes. They have limited capability when it comes to recording the neurological signals, as was just discussed, and particularly while stimulation is happening. So we set out to make a smarter device that can perform large-scale recording, perform computations to sense biomarkers of disease, and to treat on demand and in the time and manner that's required for the patient. And this is known as closed-loop neuromodulation. So we call this device WAND, the Wireless Artifact-Free Neuromodulation Device. And the chips we used were actually developed by our startup company, Cortera Neurotechnologies. And these chips, they integrate 64 channels of concurrent sensing and stimulation onto a single chip, or 128 channels on 2 chips, which is what we used. And importantly, we made WAND reprogrammable so that it could be used to test closed-loop therapies in multiple clinical and neuroscientific applications. Next slide, please. So we aim to, let's see, this one, thank you. Yeah, so we aim to make our devices as tiny and low power as possible so that we can implant them with extremely minimally invasive procedures, such as injection or laparoscopic procedures. And once inside the body, the goal is not to have any adverse reaction to their presence. The example pictured here is of an extremely small form factor device that's attached to the sciatic nerve of a rodent to stimulate muscle contraction. And we achieved this really small form factor and we're able to implant it deep in tissue because we use ultrasound to power and communicate with the devices. So our stimulator is our current version of our stimulator is 1.7 millimeters cubed. The recording device is actually sub-millimeter, 0.8 millimeters cubed, and we're working on shrinking those further. Recently, we've been working on implanting and communicating with large numbers of implants simultaneously so that you can, for example, attach a recording and a stimulating mode to every residual nerve in an amputated limb for interfacing with a robotic prosthetic arm. So it's obvious that if you can do something non-invasively, you should. So we're also working on minimally invasive wireless wearable devices. EEG, as you already heard described a bit earlier, is a method for non-invasively recording the brain's electrical activity from the scalp. It's a valuable tool in the clinic for epilepsy, sleep monitoring, and it can be used for brain-computer interfacing. And recently it's been shown that EEG can be recorded directly from inside the ear canal. At the same time that this literature was starting to come out, smart earbuds like the ones I'm wearing now have exploded onto the market. And so my group is actually developing an ear EEG system that's unobtrusive and discreet and in the form factor of a wireless earbud that connects wirelessly to your mobile device. The major challenge in ear EEG is that the signals are extremely small, even smaller than scalp EEG. In fact, this recording modality might never achieve what scalp EEG does, but that doesn't mean it isn't useful from the perspective of enabling a brain-computer interface. And the signals are smaller, as it was mentioned before, just because the device is a little more distant from the brain. But we set out to build a device to show, that we actually can record a set of EEG signals robustly from the ear canal, enough to use them in a brain-computer interface. So my group has developed this device, which is has a user-generic earpiece based on flexible electronics that makes excellent contact with the ear canal and produces high-quality signals with good mechanical stability in the ear. We've also developed a high-performance wireless readout device and performed user studies that show that we can robustly record common EEG signals that are used in BCIs, as well as in health monitoring applications. So we're out now to show that we can track neurological states and use these signals to control devices. And in a nutshell, that's my group with examples of the kinds of things we're working on. Thanks.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Ricky. All right, it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christoph Gruger. Christoph completed his PhD in 1999 and then started a company, GTech, which now has branches in Austria, Spain, the USA, and Hong Kong. GTech produces high-quality neurotechnology and real-time brain-computer interfaces for the research, medical, and consumer markets. So thank you very much for joining us, Christoph.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for organizing the event. So I will show you current and future brain-computer interface applications that we are developing by GTech. If you go to the next slides. So I'm based in Austria, where we have our headquarters, where we are doing the research and development mostly. And then we have also offices in Barcelona, where we develop, for example, our medical product line. And we have also offices in Albany in the US and Hong Kong, mostly for sales activities, but also for research. Next one. And we started about 20 years ago to develop different products that researchers can use in their environment to realize brain-computer interface applications. And on the slide, you can see, for example, one artistic installation where Dragan Ilic is controlling an industrial robot with the brain-computer interface. And he fixed many different pens on the robot, and with the brain-computer interface, he could actually create the paintings. And afterwards, he was selling the paintings in London for £25,000 after the Ars Electronica festival. The next one, but beside all these artistic and research applications, we have also medical products like shown on the next slide. So one of these products is Recoverix. This is used for stroke rehabilitation. In this case, you can see that the stroke patient is equipped with the brain-computer interface, and he's sitting in front of a computer monitor. And on the computer monitor, the avatar is moving the left or the right hand. And this is the instruction for the stroke patient to imagine this type of hand movement. Maybe you can go back to the slide before. So in this case, he's imagining a left hand movement, the brain-computer interface is picking it up. And then we can trigger an electrical stimulation of the left hand so that the left hand is actually moving. And this is pairing cognitive processes again with motor behavior. And our stroke patients just learn to move the hands again. And this even works 10, 20 or 30 years after the stroke. And you can imagine that stroke patients like it a lot if they were maybe paralyzed, if the hand moves again so many years after the stroke. And normally we perform 25 training sessions, and we know that our stroke patients highly significantly improve if we are using brain-computer interface technology for that. Next one. BCI technology can also be used by neurosurgeons, for example, in the operating room or in the intensive care unit with epilepsy patients. So in this case on the slide, you can see an epilepsy patient. He has 256 ECOG channels implanted. This means the neurosurgeon has to remove the scalp, and then the ECOG grids are placed directly on the cortex. And we are instructing the patient to do different tasks like to move the fingers to solve Rubik's Cube. And at the same time, we can do a statistical analysis of so-called high gamma activity. This pinpoints the finger region in the human cortex. Then the person can also listen to an auditory story. So we are just reading a text and the person is listening to it. And this identifies the auditory center and also Wernicke centers, which is responsible for recognizing language. So we are able to find the most important centers of the brain within a few minutes. And then the neurosurgeon knows what he should not remove. Next slide, please. And this is, of course, only possible in the operating room with a neurosurgeon, but you can also run very nice brain-computer interface experiments. This is an experiment with Dr. Kamada in Hokkaido in Japan. And in this case, the epilepsy patient has, again, high-resolution ECOG grids directly on the brain. And we have high-resolution grids even on the temporal base, that's the bottom of the brain. And that's a region responsible for recognizing faces or pictures, colors, black and white, and so on. And in this case, Dr. Ogawa is showing to the patient different images like an apple. And the patient is just looking at the image, and we can decode in real time what the patient is seeing by analyzing the data from the temporal base. And very nice is that we can even recognize what the patient is seeing before the patient is realizing it, because we are looking at this high gamma activation. So at the moment, we are able to distinguish 18 different types of information with this setup. Next one, please. And very often in BCI research, the P300 speller is shown. So this is a system which allows you to type in different characters, words, or sentences by looking at the P300 evoked potential. And this is used, for example, for locked-in patients or coma patients who cannot move. And then you can use the brain-computer interface for communication. This is something that we released more than 10 years ago, and it's a very often used applications in the BCI field. Next one. And another important applications for brain-computer interface is coma assessment. So here you can see that the coma patient is placed in a bed equipped with the brain-computer interface. And then we are able to run different BCI experiments to figure out if the coma patient has awareness and also if the coma patient is understanding us. And if this was tested successfully, we can also go to the next step and we can answer yes and no questions. Like, do you like the University of Melbourne? And then the patient can confirm with the brain-computer interface with a yes or a no. And if you ask 10 questions and the person is able to answer most of them correctly, then you get the scientific proof that he is understanding you. Next slide, please. And at the moment, we are running about 15 different research projects, mostly from the European Commission, where we develop new things and new applications about brain-computer interfaces. The first one, HOPE, for example, looks at high-frequency oscillations in epilepsy patients to detect epilepsy. And next one. So you can see that the projects are mostly funded in Horizon 2020. That's the current European research funding scheme. Next slide, please. And it's a mixture between really new technology, but we also work, for example, on RecoverX leg to use brain-computer interface for lower limb stroke rehabilitation too, so to develop new medical products. And the last slide, please. And at the moment, we are also building a 1024 channel EEG device so that you can capture EEG data with never seen resolution. And then we can distinguish, for example, single fingers just with EEG recordings. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Christoph. It's now my pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Tara Hamilton, whose interests include neuromorphic systems, biomedical devices and sensors, and integrated circuit design. Tara has also worked extensively within industry, including leading health, defense, and technology companies, and she's focused on developing innovative solutions to real-world problems. Thank you very much, Tara.
Hello, everyone. Next slide. Yeah, so I was just thinking, I've been working in this area for 20 years now, which not only makes me feel rather old, but also I guess there's a lot to say. I've sort of been working in three areas related to BCIs, one being circuits and systems. So developing power management, communications, signal processing circuits to go on implantables and wearable systems. At the moment, we're looking at really low power communication systems, because the aim for us is to actually bring some of the machine learning onto our integrated circuits. And so that's quite challenging for a circuit design, where we're thinking about keeping things very small, having them being really low power so that we don't need you know, either large batteries or high-powered wireless transmission, and also thinking about how best to fit in with the body as well. So how to be more biocompatible, and yeah, a lot of the things that Ricky spoke about. So that's one area, and that's sort of where I started my journey in BCIs, doing circuit designs, and I pretty soon found that it's quite a can of worms just making good circuits. And just looking at Ricky's slides, I think the same sort of problems that were around 20 years ago are still plaguing us today. So next slide. The other aspect of my research has been on the medical devices themselves. So looking at better stimulation strategies, closed loop operation, doing recordings, neural recordings, so basically using some of the circuits that I create, but actually getting data so that we can do better at understanding what it is that we're measuring. So some of the work that I've done has been with deep brain stimulation and looking for biomarkers that would allow us to do closed loop control. We're also looking at the moment at different types of stimulation strategies for cochlear implant users. So at the moment, music is something that isn't well translated with the current strategies. And so we're working with a cochlear implant recipient, as well as some music theorists, to think about what are the features in music that we might be able to convey a lot better to cochlear implant users. We're also working on nerve regeneration projects, so looking at really low form factor electronics that can be chronically implanted into someone, that can help if there's been an accident and they've had a nerve damage, that implants that could stay, and we could measure their performance to see how they're helping grow the nerve together. And so that's definitely pushing the envelope in both the measurements and the device itself, and also the circuit design as well. Next slide. So the final aspect of my sort of journey in this area has been in neuromorphic systems and modeling. So neuromorphics is a kind of very niche field that looks at modeling neural systems for two purposes. One being to understand those systems better and to be able to make better models. And the other is to try to use those lessons that we learn from the neural system to make better algorithms and better technologies. So some of the work that I've done in this area is looking at modeling the cochlea. And from that work, we were able to gain a better understanding of some of the connectivity of the cochlea to the auditory nerve. I've also done modeling of neurons for two purposes: for understanding the dynamics of the neurons, but also for larger spiking neural networks, which is a really interesting topic right now and has the potential of lowering the power consumption for edge-based machine learning applications. So as well as those sort of modeling aspects of neuromorphic, we can also look at how the body actually does computation. And it's really interesting collection of very kind of low performance elements. Neurons are very noisy and very unmatched, but when you use them together in large connected systems, they can actually do some amazing computation. And so looking at that, and looking at how we might use noisy transistors and really low power electronic systems and connect them up in similar ways to neurons might mean that we can do more interesting and lower powered analog to digital converters and things like that. So at the moment, my group is working on a really, really aggressively low-powered analog to digital converter, and it's based on how neurons communicate as collections. And so all of this sort of leads into bio-inspired machine learning and has a lot of potential to impact how brain-computer interfaces are made to be small and you know, nice to wear if it's a wearable, or implantable in much lower form factors. That's it.
All right, thank you very much, Tara. Now, next I'll introduce Associate Professor Nick Opie, who is a biomedical engineer in the Department of Medicine at the University of Melbourne and co-head of the Vascular Bionics Laboratory. He completed his PhD in 2012 doing research on developing a bionic eye. He co-founded the company Synchron, which is a clinical stage neurovascular bioelectronics medicine company, and he's about to tell us about that work. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, David. I remember I had some pretty good PhD supervisors as well. So I'm here to talk a little bit about a minimally invasive brain-machine interface that we've been developing. When the next slide pulls up, there's a little bit of a description over what that is. It's a endovascular brain-machine interface that's deployed to the motor cortex via cerebral angiography, where it can record intentional movement or thoughts, wirelessly transmit these out of the body and translate these into commands that can be used by someone with paralysis to control external equipment, such as a computer. Now, to help you understand what that means, if you can go to the next slide and play the movie, there's a video here. So what our technology is designed to do is to be delivered via blood vessels through a jugular puncture up to the area of the brain that's responsible for volitional control. We deliver it through a catheter. We then remove the catheter, and the device is designed to self-expand within the blood vessel near the region of interest. We've shown that over time, the device becomes incorporated in the vessel, which is important because it doesn't impede the blood flow and helps to reduce the amount of bare metal exposed in the vessel. Electrical signals are then generated by the participant or the implantee naturally as they think about movement. And so as shown in this depiction that we'll keep going in a minute, these signals are transmitted from the brain. They're picked up by the stentrode and they're delivered to a wireless telemetry unit implanted in the chest. This information is then delivered from the chest to software and hardware decoding algorithms that are on a computer attached to the patient's wheelchair as shown here, and they can use that to control a system. So we've been working on this for a number of years. We have a couple of patients that have been implanted with this device, and they're going very well. And if you can just go to the next slide, and I'm happy to take any questions on how this all works. But essentially, the major technology differences and the reason we chose this approach is mainly threefold. One, the current technology, while has shown to be fantastic from numerous countries around the world, a lot of it requires removal of some of the skull to access the brain. We have observed that getting a market approval or getting devices past research and clinical trials out to become a medical product that clinicians can implant in patients who aren't part of a research trial is difficult with this surgery. So we've come up with a procedure using angiography where the skull remains intact, and we're really just using blood vessels to deliver the device. As opposed to some of these other technologies as well that have penetrating electrodes, for example, our technology takes advantage of the physiological response. As I mentioned, the electrode array or the stentrode gets incorporated into the blood vessel. This is great for blood flow, but it's also great for signal recordings. The device becomes anchored and stabilized in the vessel, and so we're recording signals from the same part of the brain more reliably. And we found over that improves the signal quality, as opposed to some of these penetrating arrays that have adverse events caused by the body rejecting these devices. Essentially, because we're in a blood vessel, it's invisible to the brain and it doesn't get rejected in the same way. Number three really is the systems that we want to develop when it needed to be an immediate, unsupervised, independent home use. We don't want the patient or the participant to have to come back to the hospital to use it. We don't want them to have to use it only when a researcher or an academic is present. The idea is that they'll be implanted with the technology, they'll go home and they'll just use it. And so that's been one of the main differences in how we've approached the product that we're developing. We've done a lot of research on the way, but certainly the aim is to get out to the people that need it. And we think that these three features, and I'm happy to discuss more, are one way that hopefully we'll get something out to people with spinal cord injury or paralysis in the not distant future. So thanks for that, and look forward to the questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. So what we'll do now is switch to a panel mode. So hopefully everybody can now see the panel. Perhaps everybody could turn their videos on, and then that would be great. Okay, but before turning to the panel, I'd like to encourage you to please take this opportunity to open the Q&A box where you can submit questions to the panel. We have had some good questions being coming in already, so let's just go straight to those. So I think one of the first questions asked by an anonymous attendee is, what potential do BCIs have for treating treatment-resistant depression or schizophrenia or other mood disorders? Would anybody like to take that? I think you mentioned this sort of treatment. Ricky, would you like to start out?
Sure, yeah. I am aware of deep brain stimulation studies that address this specifically, that are looking to alleviate major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Specifically, the studies have been addressing comorbidities in patients that already have deep brain stimulation implants, so major depression as a comorbidity with Parkinson's disease. And there have been, they're really very recent studies in the last year or two that have shown promising results in modulating mood in these patients through deep brain stimulation. So definitely there is potential.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's just move on now to the next question, which perhaps I'll direct this one to Christoph first. Somebody asking, what sort of technical skills do you think will grow in demand for BCI research and development in the future? maybe somebody who's interested in getting involved?
So you need a lot of different skills. So we have, for example, biomedical engineers, electrical engineers, computer scientists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, neurosurgeons, neurologists, quality management people. So all these fields fit very well for BCI research. Signal processing is, of course, a very important one. So you can study basically everything to work on BCIs.
Yep. That was pretty comprehensive. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. Well, thank you, Christoph. Let's move on. Nick, there's a specific question here from Avinash Singh on asking, I'm aware about successful sheep experiments with Synchron, but is there any human experiment being performed?
Yeah, there is. So about a year ago now, we implanted our first participant, and the results of which you'll have to wait a little longer. The main manuscript's just in publication, but we have implanted 2 participants now. One of them for a year, one of them for 4 months. Both of them, surgical procedure was great. The long-term safety and reliability has been great, and we're hoping to implant more participants as soon as the hospital is opening up to elective surgeries again. So we had a number of them that were lined up that had to be postponed, but yes, we are involved in clinical trials at the moment.
That's good. So can I follow up that with another question for you, Nick, from Tom Ladd? Do you have an estimate for the lifespan of the Stentrode once it's installed? Can it be replaced or repaired?
Good question. So the lifespan, the short answer is we don't know in humans. That's part of the safety study that we're doing. The longest we've obviously implanted it for is a year. We've done a large number of mechanical and biocompatibility accelerated aging trials out for 10 plus years. So there is evidence to support that. In regards to your question about how we replace or upgrade, and we're taking precedence from work that's been done in cardiac pacemakers, the stent itself becomes incorporated, so that won't get replaced, but we are able to improve and update the software as needs be, as more algorithms become suitable to help interpret and decode the neural activity. And certainly we can, the patient can plug and play into other applications as different hands get made or different prosthetic wheelchairs or devices get done. So there is a way for the device to continue to be useful for equipment and things that haven't been designed or invented yet.
Great, thanks, Nick. I might move now to a pre-submitted question for Tara. So what do you think is the role of neuromorphic engineering for improving brain-computer interfaces?
I think, as I said before, neuromorphic engineering has a sort of two-pronged attack on the problem, one being a way to model the systems. And I guess we can model with computers, but it takes days, weeks, months, years to model something very small. Whereas if we build it, we can actually turn the knobs and see how things work in real time, which I think is kind of cool to understand, smaller systems. In terms of the other aspect of neuromorphics, which is looking at getting inspired by how biology does its processing and keeps a handle on noise and so forth, I think we can use that quite extensively in making our circuits and our systems for BCIs and medical devices generally. So I think looking at sort of neural inspired, biologically inspired design and implementing that to give us better edge-based computation, but also actual circuits like analog to digital converters and things like that, we can really gain heaps from looking at how the body has already solved all those problems.
Yeah. Well, can I follow that up, Tara, with a question from Carl? saying, what's the general time frame towards commercialization of BMIs we discussed today? But perhaps I could turn that slightly to, where do you see sort of the timeline for actual commercialization of neuromorphic sort of devices?
Well, yeah, neuromorphics has been promising for 30 years. And I think maybe we're starting to get to the point where the technology is catching up with the promise. We do have the ability of integrating billions of transistors, and so we can make larger systems that do useful things. I think in terms of neuromorphics in designs, I think we'll see that quite a bit, whether it's distinctly neuromorphic or it's biologically inspired, will be a matter of semantics. But I think there's a lot of really nice designs in sort of low power feature extraction techniques that can be easily integrated onto a wearable or an implantable. And I think there are other techniques that we've been using in my lab, looking at sort of neural front ends and recording that can bring down power consumption. All of it is all inspired by some of the studies that we've done with the brain. So I would say we'll see things in devices in the next 5 years or so. But I think using like regular technology, I think we're already seeing BCIs today. We just don't realize they're actually BCIs.
Well, could I move to you, Christoph? Where do you think we are at with commercializing BCI devices?
Far ahead. So there are already many BCI devices on the market for the consumer market, where you can do fun stuff for the maker space, where you can develop your own apps very quickly. Medical devices need, of course, much longer to be on the market because of all the medical approval that you have to do, but they also stay for a very long time on the market. It's not like a cell phone, which is old after 6 months. You can use a medical device for many, many years. So this is promising, and just our companies has already the brain-computer interface for stroke rehabilitation, for coma assessment, and functional mapping on the market. So 3 brain-computer interfaces which are already used, and there are many more.
Okay, thank you. Ricky, you mentioned closed-loop control. How important do you think developing closed-loop control of neural systems is going to be in the future?
Yeah, well, I think, from the perspective of brain-machine interfaces, if you want to restore some kind of lost functionality, you absolutely need a bidirectional link or to be able to both read out and write into the brain or the peripheral nerves. I believe that for neurotherapeutics, for treating disease, it's going to be absolutely essential. And it's the way the entire industry is probably going to go in the coming years. So for example, when we developed Bond, we really, we started with a therapeutic paradigm in mind. So if we take, for example, Parkinson's disease, there are a number of applications for closed loop deep brain stimulation. So one simple application is shut it off when it's not needed. That's going to extend the battery life. That's super important because a battery requires surgery to be replaced. But on the other hand, you can also use closed loop. If you have intelligence in the loop, then you can use it to make important decisions, like exactly which parameters of stimulation you need. This is, again, extremely important because patients have their parameters tuned or titrated heuristically by a doctor. They go to a doctor's office, they run some tests, they change parameters, they send them home, they come back. This whole process can take months or years. And so if we really want to have better outcomes, faster outcomes for patients, I think closed loop is going to be absolutely essential. Also, I was asked earlier about neuropsychiatric disease. When you start thinking about how we're going to treat disease that manifests at the systems level in the brain, where symptoms are not present all the time, where it requires connection of multiple different cortical areas, we really need devices that have a large amount of intelligence, that can interpret these signals, that can learn, and that can adapt.
Thanks, Ricky. The next question, I think I will direct to the whole panel and get each of your thoughts on this. Since you're showing at the moment, Ricky, perhaps we could start with you, and then we'll move through. But what do you think are the major challenges in the advancement of BCI technologies?
I don't even know.
Name them all. Maybe just one or two.
I don't even know where to start. You know, Christoph nicely named off all of the different kind of areas of study that you could do to build BCIs, and I think that in that same vein, you know, every single area has its own extreme set of challenges. So I think it's going to be really, really important to make devices extremely compatible, long-lasting with the human body, so that they're not, you know, rejected, and that they can be used in a way that such that patients don't even know that they're there. I think integrating them with, you know, machine learning and really interpretation of signals is the next great frontier. I see a lot of questions about, you know, what are you going to do with thousands of electrodes and all that data? That's a great question. I think we have to tackle that problem.
Yeah.
So just to name two out of hundreds of immense challenges that we have.
Well, Christoph, what do you think are the top challenges?
Usability is the top challenge at the moment. So it has to be practical to use a brain-computer interface. If you need 10 minutes to put it on to spell, it's unpracticable. So it must just be there and work. For medical products, it's a little bit different, but they also must be very easy to be used in hospitals and by therapists and so on. So we have to work on that a lot.
Thank you. I'll move on to Tara. What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I sort of said I've been doing this for 20 years, and most of the problems are the same. I think we've got better tools to deal with them, though. I think power and communications are always going to be an issue. I think my white whale has always been the electrode, and how do we better connect with the neurons or whatever we want to interface with the body. I think we're probably looking at better materials, sort of hybrid, synthetic biology, you know, like a biological header or something that allows us to have the kind of fine control access that we probably need for some of the more exciting BCI things that we all kind of see in the science fiction movies.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tara. Okay, Nick, what do you think?
It's hard to choose one. I think one of the ones that comes to mind is how engineers are going to work with clinicians and regulators to get more tech out from a research product to a clinical product. As devices get more complicated, regulatory bodies want more tests done with more answers. That requires more money, and you know, there needs to be a way where tech that can really help people is able to get to them, and hopefully that can be done, you know, without companies not being able to make it because they don't have the funding to support all the tests. Is one that's on my mind at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Okay, well, we're nearly out of time, but what I'd like to do is just to go through the panel again, through each of you. Perhaps we'll go in reverse order this time, so we'll start with you, Nick, and just say, you know, in just a sentence or two, what do you think are the key takeaway messages that you would like the attendees to take with them?
I think one of them is, as you will have heard from the panelists, it doesn't really matter what your area of expertise lies. It's a huge field, and there's many ways you can get involved if you're excited about it. So don't worry if you have this skill set or that skill set. There will be a way for you to get involved in medical bionics if that's something you want to do.
Right. What do you think, Tara?
Just that it's a really exciting time to be in this area. There's actually too much to do, and there's too many rabbit holes to dive down. It's actually sort of staying focused on one thing and getting it finished. But it is an exciting time, and to everybody who's attended today, I hope that you've been excited by what you've seen, because this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Christoph?
Yeah, there are so many things to say. Watch out for all the virtual meetings to learn more. So there are so many meetings coming up soon, and it's really easy to attend now. And then you see many more applications and fascinating talks.
Yep. Thanks, Christoph. And Ricky, what would your take-home message be?
Echo what Tara said. I think this is an incredibly exciting time. I started a company in this space in 2013, which was before the BRAIN initiative and on all the various BRAIN initiatives on all the various continents had really started. And, you know, it's just a different world now. There are real companies making real products. There are jobs in this area, and the work has exploded exponentially. I mean, it's just happening so fast. And I think it's such an exciting time to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it certainly is an exciting time. Well, we've reached time. I think we could have gone on for quite a lot longer, so apologies to the many questions that we have been able to get to. But on behalf of the University of Melbourne, I'd like to thank our panelists for your contribution to the Innovation in Brain-Computer Interfaces webinar. And also I'd like to thank our audience for your questions and interest in this discussion and just joining us. A special thanks to Zara for the live graphic recording of today's discussion. Now I'd just like to invite Farhad and Andy to present a final slide to talk about the BCI community that they have been running.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Yeah, as you heard from everyone, this is a very exciting and up-and-coming space. Farhad and I started the Neurotech Australia chapter, which is part of the NeuroTechX global community for everything and anything related to neurotechnology, including BCI. NeuroTechX has been around for a number of years now, started in North America, but more chapters are opening up around the world. Our focus is on community education and professional development. On the community side, we will have more events like this. We have started a program for high school students to learn about STEM and coding with a neurotech flavor in a fun way, and we will organize hands-on workshops on BCI systems.
Yeah, and just to wrap it up, that this is entirely driven by volunteers for and by the community. So we really encourage everyone to join the meetup group, which will be in the communication channel. And we also post events there. So you can find the link that has been posted. Mel just posted that into the chat. And on top of that, if you're in Australia and if you're interested in volunteering, please let us know. We're always, we're in the news chapter, so we're always looking for passionate people to join us. Thanks again, David.
Great, thanks Andy and Farhad. So finally, we'd appreciate your input on our post-event survey, which is displayed in the chat box on the screen and will appear when the session ends as well. So we really value your feedback. We want to run a lot more of these sorts of webinars, and so the feedback will help with that. If you wish to find out more about what the University of Melbourne is doing within this space, please ensure you provide your details to be kept up to date in that survey. So with that, I thank you very much again for attending, and goodbye all.